This episode is brought to you in part by Thomas Nelson, publisher of Fighting Shadows, Overcoming 7 Lies That Keep Men from Becoming Fully Alive, written and narrated by Jefferson Bethke and John Tyson. Available now everywhere you get audiobooks.
I needed structure. I needed a standard and a foundation, solid. I knew that that was the only way that I was going to be the mom that I wanted to be. If I'm going to bring a child in this life, if I'm really going to dedicate this, if I'm going to do this, I can't do it no other way. And so that's when I dedicated my life. And I was about 19, 20, completely left everything. I mean, I was selling drugs. I was just living a real tough life, like doing whatever I felt I wanted to do. I was just out there and completely left all of that. I disappeared from everybody. I said, if I'm gonna do this, I gotta get rid of everything. I just gotta focus on what does God want me to do.
This is Where You're From, an origin story podcast at the intersection of faith and culture that digs into the influences and experiences that shape who we are today. Join us as we gain insight into the Bible's wisdom for all, regardless of where we're from. Hey y'all, this is Rasul Berry. Thanks for joining me on Where You're From. This week, I want to share my conversation with Aitina Fareed-Cooke, also known as AI the Anomaly. Aitina is a creative, professor, mentor, hip-hop artist, and founder of Get Focused Productions. She is passionate about supporting her community and investing in the next generation of creatives. Her song, Privilege, which is amazing, is also featured on the Juneteenth Faith and Freedom soundtrack. Seriously, you need to check it out. You can find out more about Aitina and the Juneteenth Faith and Freedom film and soundtrack by clicking the links in the show notes or by visiting whereyou'refrom.org. That's whereyafrom.org. Now please join me as I ask Aitina Fareed-Cooke where you're from.
Buffalo, East Side, born and raised in this space.
Okay. And so tell us a little bit about East Side Buffalo.
Oh my goodness. So you'd get a lot of different stories about the East Side. You'll hear people say it was real violent on the East Side, and East Side has disparities. It's impoverished. It's, trashy. It's all of these different negative remarks. But yes, those are true. Those are things that do occur in the neighborhood, just as in many other neighborhoods. But there's also this piece that a lot of times people don't see. It's the beauty. You have older women who I grew up around that were looking out. You have the Miss Sarahs and the Miss Jones who made sure you were doing what you needed to do, or come over here and sit down and talk to me. Those types of things. And you have resources. There are resources on the East Side that has developed me over the course of years. My adoptive mother, but that's my mom, raised me, my sister, and my brother on the East Side. And though we come from a background of foster care and these kind of things that you would look at and say, what good can come out of this space? Well, she worked her behind off and made sure that we were rooted in the gospel, but also rooted in the community and doing things that uplifted the community on the East Side.
I love that allusion I caught to what good can come from Nazareth. That question that was asked about Jesus being from Nazareth, which also had a notorious reputation. Right. And the rhetorical question, the answer to that was nothing. Right. And yet something incredibly good. The only good person came from there. And so I love how you kind of connect that to your story. You mentioned you and your siblings being in the foster care system. Tell us a little bit about the circumstances that led up to that. Yeah.
So my biological mother, Laura Parker, beautiful, intelligent, creative woman who had voids in her life. And she filled those voids with what was happening during that time. So she was growing up. It was about, I want to say the 70s or so. And during that time, there was a lot of drugs and, you have crack and stuff like that. And that's what she filled her voids up with. And because of that, it put us in a position of being displaced. And so me, my brother and sister were left in the care of an unknown acquaintance for 3 days, and that person left Like they were like, she's not coming back, I'm leaving.
Wow.
So left us. So my brother's the oldest, my sister is the middle, and I'm the youngest.
Okay.
My brother's trying to take care of us. And
how much older is
so
your
my
brother?
brother, I believe, was 6. My sister, maybe she was about 4 or 5 or something like that. And then I was like 14 months old. Wow. So we were just young, and as a result of this substance abuse, that's the situation we were in. We were placed in the system, and when they did find my mother, she was locked up, and she admitted she was looking for her next fix or what have you. So kind of the story is we were placed in the foster care. We were actually separated at first. Okay. And then my brother went to my adoptive mother's house, and then he left. And in some kind of way, me and my sister came to her, and she said, these are siblings. We have to get them together. Wow. So she did whatever she needed to do to get us all together. And over time, unfortunately, my mother passed from substance abuse. I was 3 when that happened. And, we were just in the care of our foster mother. And then when I turned 7 is when my foster mother adopted all 3 of us.
But you have been living with her?
I've been living with her the whole time.
So, a couple of questions. One, do you know anything about your father?
Growing up, I didn't at first.
Okay.
So my sister and my brother have a separate father than me. We have 2 different fathers. I didn't know that because their father would come and have visitations with us, and he never treated me any different.
Wow.
That was my dad, When I turned 7, all of these things are happening. He died from, I believe, a heart attack. And it was either the day he died or at the funeral is when I found out he was not my father. So imagine a 7-year-old just like, what? So I have a dad. Like, where is that dad?
How did you find that out at the funeral?
Someone told me, someone that I knew really well told me.
Wow.
And it was in a sense of, why are you so sad it's not your dad?
Now, something you wouldn't have known about me, but why I can very much relate to that experience or understand is that my biological father, who was separated from my mom when I was 2, and so I didn't grow up with him really in my life, he was murdered when I was 7.
Wow.
So I literally can remember the experience of being at a father's funeral at 7. But what I could not imagine if someone at that funeral would then have said, oh, and this is not your real dad. I mean, it's already disorienting. You're dealing with themes of like complete loss and death when you're 7. And then on top of that, that must have been incredibly confusing. How did you feel it?
You know what? Thinking back, I know I was a sad child. I held on to that emotion heavily. But my reaction and response to that was to act out. And so my behavior was really terrible. If you could play back the moments of being in school, I'd love to see how that moment correlated to my defiant behaviors, how it increased. I was already having a hard time. I mean, I was in kindergarten throwing chairs and getting into a lot of trouble. But it makes sense, right? Where's my mother? Why am I away from my mother? Who are these people? What's going on? Imagine all of these questions that you have internally, but you're young and you don't know how to articulate the words. And then just to add more to it, on paper, I was diagnosed as emotionally handicapped due to the trauma that occurred at a young age. And it makes sense for these people with the degrees and all of that to say, this child is not going to be able to do X, Y, and Z according to our research and the statistics. These are the labels that were placed on me, such as the labels that are placed on the East Side, such as the labels that are placed on people with melanated skin or whatever the case is. And I was told I'd be a failure to thrive due to those circumstances.
You were told you would have a failure to thrive?
Yep. Wow. In the 80s, because we're talking 80s, 90s, that language was normal. It's literally on paper, failure to thrive due to the circumstances.
Okay. So you mentioned remembering this visit from your mother. Was that pretty soon before her passing? And what do you remember about the visit?
So for whatever reason, I can remember her coming into the space, and laying down in my bed and sleeping most of the time. And I thought it was funny that she was sleeping in my bed. Like, oh, mommy is sleeping in my bed. For some reason, like, that memory is burned in my mind. Unfortunately, I don't remember interactions. I just, for some reason, remember that. And then I remember walking down the aisle to her coffin. So those are the two kind of memories that I have.
But there's something, even though beautiful, about a picture of just her laying beside you still, you know, and of all the places she could have chose to rest, she chose to be next to you. Tell us about your older siblings as well. I mean, your brother, your older sister, and what y'all dynamic was like, because y'all went from being separated to now being brought together. Yeah,
so growing up, I think it's a lot of things to unpack, but overall, we were just trying to figure out where our place was. We were just trying to figure that out. Honestly, growing up, you know, I looked up to both my brother and my sister. I wanted to be like my sister. My brother did a lot of writing and drawing. Our family, the more I look into it, very, very creative. My sister was a poet, a writer, and just, she liked to create jewelry and things like that. And she just had this aura about her. And I felt like she was just so confident in who she was, her style. She wanted to be a fashion designer. My brother wanted to be a fashion designer, but she was into fashion too. And I'm like, man, I just want to be just like you. I don't know if our relationship, it was that great because I was the little sister. So I was trying to find ways to get on both of their nerves. But today,
I'm a little brother, so I get it.
So, you know, it was like, I wake up, in what ways can I get on my sister's, for the most part, my sister's nerves? Oh, I'm going to get her Barbies and I'm going to cut their hair. What else can I do? And it's a strange thing, because I think now, with the understanding that I have, it was a symbol of feeling connected, a strange way to feel connected, because you're going to give me an energy.
Which means you're paying attention to me, which means I matter. Right? Yeah, no, I get it.
Because for whatever reason, I didn't know any other way. But to do something that got on your nerves, and now you're feeding me this energy, instead of just saying, I really like you. I think you're dope. Like, you're my big sister and I want to be just like you. That could have been easy to say, right? But no, let me hide all your clothes and steal them and wear them to school. But today, my sister is my best friend.
Wow.
I talk to my sister all the time, and we share a lot between each other. She's an amazing mother. She is an amazing educator. She works in Washington, D.C., just working hard to break down systematic issues as it relates to foster care. Yeah, she's a dynamic woman.
That's so cool. So you've talked about, in this incredible, challenging season, finding solace and empowerment in your faith in God. That's a part of the story that you have shared about your life. Tell us a little bit about how that got sparked, that faith, and what it meant to you, especially in these very challenging times in your life.
Yeah, so growing up, my mother was not playing games. She said, y'all going to church. And we went to church every day.
Okay.
Lord have mercy. Early in the morning, prayers, Bible studies, you know, youth programs, all of these different things, Sunday school. We stayed in church, I feel like, all Sunday.
Yeah, these young folks don't know about,
they don't know nothing about
morning
that.
Service, afternoon service, meal, evening service.
Yes, it's not enough patience. That developed my patience. I wanted to leave, but I couldn't. So I had to figure it out. And then just the beautiful, soul-wrenching songs. I grew up on that. And so I had this very heavy desire to please God at a young age. I remember that. The way I looked at God, or whatever was taught to me during these times, I knew that He is like this being, this force that I should fear and reverence. Not that I had a full understanding of how to establish a relationship with Him or understanding how to apply scriptures to my life. I don't think that that was necessarily like taught the way that I know now. But growing up, you know, it was this reverence for God. And I knew that He was it. That's what I felt. And so, yeah, that's where it stemmed from.
So your adoptive mom takes on an enormous task that most people don't do, not just
In her 50s.
Wow.
She had already raised 3 women, and she had over 30 youth that she fostered throughout her time. And you know, she's 91 and still runs a church pantry. Today.
Amazing.
Yes, she is amazing.
So how much did she talk about, or did you observe her faith relating to this impact and desire that she had to foster you and your brothers and others?
I think it stemmed from a place of care. She always says someone has to care, you know. When they, meaning the system, the counselors or the court system or what have you, when she approached them to take us in, they were like, are you sure you want to take these 3 in? On paper, this one is this and this one is that.
Failure to thrive.
This is that. And they have these issues and you're going to have to deal with a lot. And she did. She had to do it. That's a lot. 3 young people who are dealing with so much trauma or whatever the case is. And she said, I'm confident I can. And she did.
And that confidence came from her faith that she felt like she was there on purpose, for a purpose.
Yep.
How do you remember feeling about being received into her home and knowing the challenges that you brought or that the situation brought, that her choice to receive you as her own?
So looking back, it's almost as if God constructed an individual that I needed. And the moment I'm like, what is going on? I want to get out of this situation. Doesn't feel good. Some of these things don't seem right. But now I'm like, that's exactly what I needed, because this is what I'm supposed to do.
Right.
And if it wasn't for some of these things, and you know, we could remove some things.
Right.
It's like, yeah, that wasn't necessary. But today it's like, yo, I needed a strict, strong, fierce, God-loving, God-serving individual in my life. Because who I need to be right now in the midst of all that's going on, I need all of that.
Yeah.
I need all of it. You know, it taught me restraint. It taught me patience. It taught me empathy. It taught me the things that I needed in order to be the mom I am, to be the wife I am, to be the educator I am, to be all that I am today, which is why I'm a firm believer, and I always try to talk to the next generation about wherever you are, not that you want to accept some things that are occurring. Some things are not right. But while you're going through your life's journey, pay attention and think, okay, this doesn't feel right. What can I learn?
That's so good. One last thing I want to circle on, because you've talked about how your sister, your older sister, now works toward addressing problems in the system and in foster care. And you've alluded to that. Maybe I think it might be helpful to kind of unpack that, because on outside looking in, if someone is not familiar with that, they were like, I mean, it's great that we have a foster care system and that we try to cover and care for people who, or kids who are abandoned or whose parents aren't able to care for them. What's wrong with that? Help us understand a little bit about some of the gaps and the challenges that need to be even reformed.
Yeah. So there's several things that are a problem within the system. We label these young people foster children.
Okay. And
with that label, what I've experienced growing up in school is that you looked at that label and you didn't look at me. You didn't humanize me. You just looked at my paper and you saw all of the defiant behaviors and you attributed it to, oh yeah, this is a foster kid. She's just terrible. And when I did the same things that other students did, it was highlighted more because I was a foster child. Oh, because you come from a crackhead. You're a crack baby. Oh yeah, she has issues. Something's wrong with her. That's a problem. So a foster child is dealing with the fact that they're coming from whatever they're coming from. They're not with their family. The ones that birthed them, they're not with them. They're already displaced. Then on top of that, you gather all these statistics. You place it on them, you label them. You don't know how many houses or homes that they've come from. And sometimes, let's get to this part, some foster homes are abusive. I don't want to give a lot of detail.
Sure.
But I'll say this, because I've said it before. This is terrible, all right? And then I also want to deal with like some beauty in it too, right? I want to give the balance. But I would have visits, I don't know who, I don't know why, but when I would come back, I would have burn marks on my legs from almost as if someone used my legs as an ashtray. You know, there's a way that people see foster children as if they're not human.
Right.
Even in school. When I would be in school, usually during the first week of school, every single year, I would feel like we have the same assignment. Family tree. Now I have to put a family tree together, and I'm looking at everybody's family tree. They got mom, they got dad, uncle, auntie, and they said, bring in photos. And I'm like, I'm not like them. And when their parents would come in, their parents were young. My mom, you know, she was in her 50s. They're like, oh, that's your grandmother. And it's like, well, it's not my grandmother. Like, oh, then who is she? Oh, she's my foster mom. Foster mom? Where's your real mom? Oh, your mom didn't love you enough. These types of things. So you have this mindset that I'm not like you all. And whatever behaviors you're putting on me enforces that. So I'm not same. I'm different. Yeah. Something's wrong with me. Okay, then I'm just going to do whatever. I don't know. I'm lost. You feel bound. You feel imprisoning.
And in the context of that, you've talked about art, and you said in the past, music is my remedy.
Yes.
It's my medicine. Tell us about how you came to experience music as a remedy and what that means.
So out of all of that, right, and that's intense and that's heavy, but that's truth, right? But then you have this beauty that's within that. You have these individuals that do see you as human. And one of those individuals was this counselor. I wish I could remember her name. She did a good job of being wise and paying attention. One thing she said was, why don't you take this pen, take this paper, and just write, just be free. And I would draw, then I started to write. Writing became stories. When I realized that I can paint stories and characters that had my emotions and the problems that I felt, I could put them into a character. That's not me. That's just this character I created. No, I'm not talking about me. I hid behind the lines. I hid behind the words. It was my mechanism of being able to say what I felt like I needed to say, to actually get it out without really exposing my true feelings. It was a sanctuary for me. So I fell in love with writing at a young age. And then that turned into poetry, which turned into music naturally, because I was listening to hip hop, even though I wasn't supposed to, because my mom wouldn't let me. But I had to be up on the times. You know, I couldn't go to school and everybody singing this certain songs, and I'm like, I don't know what y'all talking about. So I fell in love with hip hop, all types of music, really. And so that's where it led me to that space.
Do you remember the song or the moment or the energy or the experience or artists that kind of captured your attention?
I remember moments. I remember loving the storytelling behind hip hop, the metaphors that you had to dig into to figure out the different meanings of what they were saying, like on the surface. And I realized the reason why I love that is because I was doing that with stories. So I'm writing about me, but you didn't know I was writing about me. And I would travel or allow for listeners to travel through these different pictures through words and metaphors. And then you have like Lauryn Hill. Lauryn Hill, Lauryn Hill did something to me. And I think that who God designed me to be, when I would hear and see Lauryn, I'm like, oh, this is possible. And she's saying things that make sense and matter. And she's uplifting me. So when you hear the intellect that they carry within their language and you dissect that and you analyze their words, I would write their lyrics. I would record it. and try to memorize it and then spit it back. And then that's where I was like, well, let me try to put my own words in here and fit it within this rhythmical pattern.
Yeah, I mean, when the Fugees came out, the score, I remember walking through a college dorm and you could hear everybody playing just a different song on the same album. Yep. It was that big. And you've actually described your style and your approach as Lauryn Hill, Roberta Flack, and Rod Digger, which is quite the combination. Yeah. That's not just hip hop. That's R&B, that's soul, that's jazz. Like, tell us about how this aspect of the inspirations of various genres even inspired you.
I mean, growing up on gospel music all throughout the house, you know, it's a soul-wrenching music that comes from a place of emotion. Yeah. And so I grew up on that in the choir and heard different music in that way. My mom didn't play like anything else besides gospel. Got it. When I went to performing arts at Buffalo Public School, it was Mr. Davis, who was our music teacher, who put us on to music. Like, he put us on to jazz. He would let us listen to certain music. I think I might have heard Roberta Flack for the first time from him. I'm talking Big Mama Thornton. I'm talking Fats Domino, Frank Sinatra, and even going to Bach. These classical musicians and conductors, just a range of music. And he would tell us the truth about the music. He would talk to us about how Elvis took the hound dog song from Big Mama Thornton and then turned it into whatever he turned it into. But still, yet the emotion behind jazz, the spontaneity of jazz, the musicality and the instrumentation, all of that within jazz is something that I feel like I like to look at myself like I grew up on the East Side, so I have that grit, that grind, that like, yo, we good, but don't push me too hard. Right. And I have to do what I got to do. I know how to, you know, handle myself. That juxtaposed to I have restraint. So you have that raw digger. Yeah. Like, I'm going to knock you out if I need to. But you have that poise that Lauryn has. And the professionalism and the confidence of Roberta Flack and all those things, I feel like it makes sense. Right. So
now the other part of that, because there are these two worlds, and even in your own life experience, you have, you know, your mother who's all the way in on gospel and even forbidding you from these other experiences and these other genres and kind of music styles. Then you have the performing arts school that is exposing you to these things and this teacher, and you're like coming awake. How do you reconcile or synergize these two very different worlds? Your faith, which was very personal and real, with this music that is being influenced by a lot of different people of different backgrounds.
Yeah, I say during that time, I had no idea. You know, I still during that time, you know, in high school, I'm a teenager. I was dealing with a lot. That is around the time where I met my father for the first time. Okay. And so I was going through a lot. And obviously, there's this level of understanding like, wait, there's something that I need to do perhaps, maybe? Like, what is that? So it was during this time and understanding that I want so bad and desperate to please God, but I'm not a perfect person. I got this hip hop, I got this music, I have these arts programs that I'm part of. I was just kind of pulling all these things together and trying to figure out, like, who am I? What am I going to do with all of this? It wasn't until, like, as I matured and got older that I realized, like, oh, these are tools that I can use to showcase my truth and the truth and what I believe, which is, you know, at the end of the day, is God, agape love, unconditional love. All of these different moments and things that happen in my life, utilizing the creative arts is an opportunity to share that.
Okay. So I got to circle back a little bit because you have alluded to this kind of streak of acting out that is quite hard for me to picture.
I know,
knowing the you now, which is this very poised, classy, calming person. So it's actually a little bit hard for me to believe.
Thank God that social media wasn't around. So looking back and like, oh yeah, these are moments where I was having a hard time understanding how to move the feelings I felt were true.
Right.
I just didn't have the tools needed to address whatever issues that were going on.
Right.
Which that's why I try to teach young people, like, you may have what you want to do, or the purpose or the root of it is purposeful, but you don't know how to address it. I even think about like Joseph.
Okay.
You know, being
down.
in a situation where something is placed on your life, like maybe the favor of God or whatever the case is. And I look at it like his brothers to me are like the system on me, where it's like, there's no way you're going to be able to do this.
Right. The dream that you have, you can't, that dream
you're
can't.
Like, you're a foster child, you know, 3 out of whatever only do X, Y, and Z. You're not going to be able to do X, Y, and Z. You're a failure to thrive. You're emotionally handicapped. Your mom was on drugs. This is your place. And every situation I went in, I was faced with certain circumstances, but pushed through. You know, you think about Joseph, and, you know, chick was trying to get snatch him up. It was like, nah. Then he got put in jail. And even in jail, he just used his talents, gifts, skills that God gave him. And then he got out of that. Then he got out of the next thing. Then he kept being placed. And I look at my life like, dang, every situation, every circumstance where I faced opposition, it was tough. But then I was elevated. And then I was elevated again.
Right. And I love what Joseph says at the end of his life, recounting the story, you know, at the point where his brothers who had sold him into slavery now are depending on him for survival, not realizing it's him. And then he discloses himself, and they're like excited. But then when the father dies, they're like, okay, now Joseph is going to get his revenge.
Yep.
And so they come up with this elaborate way to basically like, remember, Dad said, you know, don't mess with us. And he weeps and he says, am I in the position of God? What you meant for evil, God is using for the good, for the saving of many lives.
See?
And that's holding that tension, the dark, the pain, and the beauty and the hope together.
Yeah.
He's like, oh yeah, y'all, what y'all did was wrong to me.
It was.
But God still used it.
Yep.
And I hear that you're saying that in your
absolutely.
story.
Like, you know how you go through things in life. Not everything can be revealed, but there's some really sad circumstances and opposition that I faced growing up with people that should have cared for me, and I was in the care of. But I'm not bitter by it because all of that just led me to where I am today.
So when would you say that corner turned? And I know it's not a completely 180 necessarily particular moment, but when it really turned from the lack of restraint and the acting out, and you know, when did you go from Moses catching bodies to Moses leading the people?
There's many different things, you know, like I said, being involved in the enrichment, it showed me something. There was a program here in Buffalo called Yo Buffalo, Youth Opportunity Buffalo, and that was in my teens. Perfect timing for me. I needed that. I needed that so much because it was something I desired. Like, I need something. And so going through these programs where I learned about photography, I developed skills in video productions. We traveled, went to youth conferences. I was able to learn about public speaking. I was able to give speeches and different things like that at these different conferences. I was able to facilitate workshops. I'm talking 16, 17, going on the road, being able to see different places.
Right.
The more I saw and the more I was exposed to something different, the more my mind expanded. And it granted me this idea, there's more. It's not just my street and my block and my hood. It's not just Buffalo.
Right.
There's more.
Right.
And I have these skills and people are attracted to these skills. It's earning me money and I'm young. It expanded my mind. Now still, I'm going to church and things like that. And I kind of had this moment in my teens where it was like, I can't be perfect. I had this idea that I was God's only mistake. And I accepted that because I can't be perfect. There's no way I can like be saved and then like keep going to the altar and getting saved. Problem with that ideology. But I just kind of fell into this space of being lost, but still I had this other thing, this creative arts. And so as that matured and grew, I started to find hope. Like, I have a purpose. I'll never forget sitting in the classroom at SEPA Gallery, which is a photographic gallery in our city, which I sit on a board for now.
Wow.
And support their educational programs. I sat there and I said, I need every young person to feel this. And it was that moment where I was like, any chance I get, I'm going to teach them whatever skills that I have. It was that moment. I must have been 15 to 18. Then you get into 18, where I just make a conscious decision. I'm going to just do whatever I want.
Okay.
I got into a dark space. I felt there was no hope. Once again, that situation of getting hit with different life situations. And I started to accept the failure to thrive. Oh, I keep messing up because I'm a failure to thrive. Wow. Got into a dark place, completely stepped away from God, still believed in God, still knew that he was the ultimate, but made choices. Got into street life, did foolishness, a whole stretch of foolishness, while still knowing that my soul was leading to eternal damnation. I knew that and accepted it. Then I got pregnant. When I got pregnant with my son, that's the turning point.
When we come back, Aitina will share how her unexpected pregnancy radically changed the trajectory of her life and set her down a path to faith and freedom. That's coming next on Where You're From.
This episode is brought to you in part by Pittsburgh Theological Seminary. Pittsburgh Theological Seminary students are grounded in faith and formed in community. PTS students are preparing for ministry with Master of Divinity, Master of Arts, Doctor of Ministry, and certificate programs. Begin your master's or certificate program in person or online. Financial aid is available. Visit pts.edu/admit.
Hey y'all, before we get back to my conversation with Aitina Fareed-Cooke, I just wanted to remind you that we're on a short break, but we'll return with more great stories in fall of 2024. Also, don't forget to check out Aitina's song Privilege in the Juneteenth Faith and Freedom soundtrack. You can also watch the Juneteenth documentary and learn more about the Voices collection by going to experiencevoices.org. That's experiencevoices.org. Now let's get back to our conversation with Aitina Fareed-Cooke on Where You're From.
When I made that decision where I said, I'm going to have my son, I'm going to go through with this pregnancy. And I'm glad that I made that choice. I knew in order to be the best mother that I could be, I had to go to the only source that never shifted, changed, that never showed me anything different. God was always constant. His word was always constant. I needed structure. I needed a standard and a foundation, solid. I knew that that was the only way that I was going to be the mom that I wanted to be. If I'm going to bring a child in this life, if I'm really going to dedicate this, if I'm going to do this, I can't do it no other way. And so that's when I dedicated my life. And I was about 19, 20, completely left everything. I mean, I was selling drugs. I was just living a real tough life, like doing whatever I felt I wanted to do. I was just out there and completely left all of that. I disappeared from everybody. I said, if I'm gonna do this, I gotta get rid of everything. I just gotta focus on what does God want me to do. It was all about loving my son. And the more that I learned about love through the gospel, the more that I put people in my circle that had love for themselves, for God, and for me, the more that I learned from that circle of individuals, the more it led me to understanding I love me. And I don't think I ever understood that all that time. The love for me. Once you love you and realize that, then it makes sense to love your neighbor as yourself. Because if I was out here doing all types of foolishness and leading myself into darkness, then I would do the same to anyone else.
Right.
You know, I'm not doing good for you if I'm not going to do good for me.
You know, your story reminds me of Romans chapter 8, which is like my favorite chapter in the Bible. But in verse 14, we read, "For all who are led by the Spirit of God are sons of God. For you did not receive the spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you have received the spirit of adoption as sons, by whom we cry, Abba, Father." When you hear that, how does that resonate with your own journey?
Yeah, I think back to all the moments. The moment of being born into this world, being given whatever I had, and beautiful woman my mother was, intelligent and creative, but just broken, you know, and trying to figure out what is my place, and being lost like us as individuals, lost in this world in sin or what have you, and then being adopted, you know what I mean, by this individual who was placed in the best that she could in that moment, and feeling a sense of like, oh man, I'm loved, I have something. And then going through this transformation of then realizing, yeah, that's what's up, but there's something else. There's another adoption that needs to happen. My soul, you know, being lost and kind of out there without a direction within me and my soul, and going through that process of being adopted by God through Christ. That's dope. When you look at that transformation that I've gone through, and because of that transformation, I'm able to do the things that I'm doing.
And let's talk about the things that you're doing, because there's a lot of things that you're doing. One, you founded Get Focused Productions, which is a really interesting name. Tell us what the name means for you and what Get Focused Productions is. Yeah.
Funny enough, when I was in my teens, me and my friend, we were rappers and we wanted to start a label. Okay. And I was like, Get Focused. We could call it Get Focused. That didn't pan out. And then I got older. The idea of being an entrepreneur was seeded in me through the program. And I was doing photography and I was earning money throughout that time. And I'm like, well, I probably need a DBA. Like, that's the way to go. And so I decided.
A DBA?
DBA, doing business as.
Oh, okay.
Like, it's a certificate.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I did that, and I named it Get Focused, because that's, for me specifically, like getting focused on life itself. Like, what is it that I need to do? You kind of put all the things on the table. Like, this is all I have. I'm a creative. I have faith. My family is important. You know, all of these different things. All right, so now what do I do with it? Like, let's focus in and figure out, all right, well, how do I position these things in order to do whatever it is I need to do? So that's kind of the idea behind it, like getting focused. And then the practical sense of business itself, getting focused, making sure you have all of your ducks in a row, making sure your taxes is on point. As far as business and branding, how do you focus your brand? How do you focus and then take care of marketing, promotions, and, you know, build around whatever your brand is? So, yeah.
Got it. Now, a key part of what you do, and it's kind of come full circle in the way that you combine art, storytelling, but also this aspect of reaching the next generation. How does that play itself out? Like, in what ways do you show up in young people's lives who maybe you see yourself in the same crossroads that you were in high school?
Yeah, so many different ways. I'll deal with what we have right now. So every contract that we earn, we're pulling in emerging artists to work alongside of us, to collaborate in order to earn income. I find ways to not necessarily employ, but empower. You know, I want people to earn their businesses. And so right now we're partnered with Villa Maria College with their students. And so the students are learning about digital media communications, but now they're able to work alongside of us on projects in order to then take what they're learning in the classroom and then apply it. Right. And that makes it real for them. The same kind of realness I felt when I was a teenager. So like creating opportunities, the bigger the platform is for me, the more space I have to allow for others to get on that platform.
Yeah.
Like I tell my children, let my ceiling be your floor. And so that's my life. In what ways can I take whatever I'm given and share it with the next generation so that they get a sense of like, oh, this is something that I can do as well.
That's so great. Before I dig in a little bit more, I got to ask you, because you posted recently about your connection with a Grammy award-winning project that you got to be a part of, even in your own right, seeing that artistry kind of expand. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So Lecrae, shout out to Lecrae for having the mindset to say, you know what, let me share my platform. You know, he reached out to me to be part of a track from Church Close 4.
Yep.
When I saw the message, I'm like, this is not, like, who is this? But I went ahead and did what I did and wrote the song, created a visual, because that's another opportunity to showcase perspective. And yeah, that thing earned a Grammy.
Hey,
that's wild.
That is.
And so I'm over here doing what I did. That's great. Like, it's a Grammy, you know, awards and accolades.
Yeah.
You know, I get it.
Right.
Well, my husband shared it with his students. So he's a school teacher.
Okay. And
he always exposes all his 4th grade students to my music and everything. When he told me about how they reacted, I'm like, oh, that's what it's about.
Right.
To every foster kid that's seeing me, I have to say, yes, I was part of a Grammy award-winning album. I have to. And I have to remind them I was a foster child. I was adopted. I dealt with abuse. I dealt with this. I dealt with that. But look at this.
And you failed to thrive.
Yep. I'm a failure. I'm thriving.
I'm thriving,
You know?
right. So, and speaking of Lecrae, you know, that's another point of connection with the project that we have been able to team up on. We had a chance to have him be part of the Juneteenth Faith and Freedom film. Yeah. He lent his time and persona to that, and then also contributed to the Juneteenth Faith and Freedom soundtrack. And I would say, because it was going to be on Church Close 4, but he decided to put it on this. So I feel like we kind of won a Grammy too.
Take it.
Hey. So yeah, tell us a little bit about what Juneteenth means to you, and then we could talk about the collaboration and the project that we did together.
Yeah, glad you asked. So this idea of realizing that you're free, or first and foremost, being enslaved, taken from your original space, or being displaced.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out how to cope through that, being whipped and chained by your circumstances, but then paralleling it to my situation of the chains of the system, being chained with the label of failure to thrive, being displaced from my mother and father due to systematic oppression, because that's what it is. During that time, crack cocaine, where did that come from? That's a whole nother conversation. But this whole idea of being chained, being bound, not knowing that there's freedom, and you can be free from systematic oppression. You are free from it. There's nothing holding us back anymore. So what do you do with that freedom? So like with Juneteenth, when they realized, oh shoot, we free? What does that mean? Like, what do we do? And you're in this place of vulnerability, like where we come from, where do we look towards? Comparison to my situation of realizing like, I don't have to accept the chains. I'm literally free. There's freedom in Christ, freedom in this space of creativity or whatever the case is. I have this freedom and ability. Now what do I do? And I'm not at all comparing my life to the darkness that a lot of our ancestors have gone through, but just that the metaphorical sense of displacement from your origin, you know, and then realizing all that you went through, you've just been granted freedom. And what do you do with that?
Such a powerful parallel. And not only is that just a framework that you can relate to and that resonates with your own experience, but also in the city of Buffalo,
Yeah.
where we are right now, y'all kind of have a history of getting turned for Juneteenth. So tell us a little bit about how you remember Juneteenth, even prior to it becoming a federal holiday in 2021.
Oh, man, I just remember being young and like I was excited about Juneteenth because it was the parade and you're able to see these people who look like you, like they're wearing the color of my skin, like, and they're just walking in this parade and dancing and very confident. And it's like, this is the time to come together to celebrate that. And I loved being part of that. So it was always a big deal. And Buffalo is like, our Juneteenth is the biggest thing. People look to our Juneteenth and how we do it to mimic that. Right. So, you know, we've been here for years. We've been doing it. We've been doing it.
You know, and so tell us a little bit about the name AI, the anomaly. And then we're going to talk about privilege. But AI
stands for all in. It's the first two letters of my name. Aitina, Aitina, and then anomaly. When trying to craft, what am I going to name myself as an artist? Right. Like something that I feel like I would never want to change. Anomaly, the definition of it is the deviation from the rule. The rule on my life was that I would be a failure to thrive and that I'm emotionally handicapped and this and this and that. I'm the deviation of that. Wow. And I chose to deviate from that trajectory. Wow. You know, those statistics, like, nope, I'm the anomaly.
Okay, so tell us about privilege.
Yes, privilege. So during that time frame, I do a lot of teaching and I'm a creative educator and I'm in a lot of different spaces. And I feel like during that time, I think I was co-curating an exhibition, one of the largest Black exhibitions in our city for a huge museum, Buffalo AKG. We did this exhibition called In These Truths. And I think maybe during that time is where there was a lot of talk about privilege and white privilege and things like that. And I would be in these conversations and around young people that would hear that, and you'd have a white male or white woman come into a place where a lot of the young Black kids, and they're like, you know, I can't really say X, Y, and Z, you know, with my white privilege, and I get it. However, when I look in the faces of these young people and they hear this idea of like, oh, you got this privilege, I don't, it just takes me back to the labels of you're a failure to thrive. Yeah. I'm thriving. But you, because of all of this, because of the circumstances you're coming from, this is what we're putting on you. And that's just what it is. And so if you say that I have privilege, what does that say? You don't. You don't have privilege. But I don't like that. I do understand, like, two things can be true at times. Right. I do understand you may not have had to go through experiences because your skin is a different color. Right. And you may not have come up in certain impoverished conditions or whatever the case is. But the thing is, some people that look like you, they've gone through that too, you know. Absolutely. Let's put a pin on that. But to say that because you carry this beautiful melanated skin, you don't have privilege. That never sat right with me. You do have privilege. I have privilege. I come from the East Side. That's privilege. You know why? Because I've learned to love. I've learned what it means to be taken care of by my community. I've learned what it is to see people fight, but then come back together again. That's privilege to me. It's privilege to be able to be displaced, but then to be accepted and adopted. That's privilege. Family, that's privilege. To be in a space that you call a disparity, you say it's impoverished, but all that I ever learned through creative arts was on the East Side. That's privilege. You can't tell me that because you carry a certain complexion that you have all the privilege and I don't. And I refuse to allow for young people to accept the fact that, oh, you're privileged and I'm not. No. Let me tell you what privilege is. You come from a creative being who created you. We all have. That's privilege, period. But like I said, I understand two things can be true. I get you have the resources. Maybe you grow up in a different circumstance, but that could be anybody. Yeah. You could be melanated, beautiful Black, and come from very affluent circumstances. So you're not privileged. You know?
And it's weird, yeah, because it's like even somehow an attempt to be compassionate about someone's circumstance can end up setting the bar so low that you end up encouraging them to not shoot for the stars.
Exactly, because you don't know. And then if you continue to have young people in certain circumstances and you don't give them certain outlets or resources, what do they have to aspire to?
Right.
Which is why the program was so vital in my life, because it gave me exposure to things that I didn't know. I'm coming from a street where across the street there was a drug house and next door there was. That was my reality. But then I go to these programs and I travel and I'm like, oh, not every neighborhood is this way. Oh, the thing that was normal, I'm questioning it because of the opportunities that I have.
Got you. And speaking of those opportunities, you then always look for ways to create these opportunities for others.
Yep.
And you did that with privilege as well. Yep. Tell us about how you did that.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, I want to be able to use all the different parts of me. I think it's possible. I used to think like, oh, I'm doing too much. You got life and you got death and you got the dash in between. This how I'm living out my dash.
All right.
I'm a creative. So I'm like, okay, if I get the opportunity through, Mary called me and we talked and she said, hey, you know, what can you do?
Shout out to Mary Beth.
I know, shout out. Definitely. So I wanted to add the educational component. In what ways can I bring on emerging artists to be part of this process? Like, let's not just make a video. Let's teach the next generation of creatives how this process works. So through 4 sessions, 3 of which they had to watch Juneteenth Faith and Freedom. They had to research both you, Mary Beth, and to really understand the producers, the writers, and things like that. We looked at one-shot videos because that was my desire. I love one-shot videos. No cuts, no edits. You just have to choreograph the whole thing. And so we researched different one-shot videos and planned out and developed a storyline that took us on this journey from what they wanted to showcase for the song Privilege. And we went through that thing and we made it happen. On the 4th session is when we filmed it. The main character, she discovered all of the stuff on that day. Wow. She did a really good job. 15 years old. Yeah, she's very talented. Hadia.
Yeah. Shout out to Hadia.
And her mom, Drea. Thank you for letting her take part. And so to be part of something like that, a lot of the students are like, I never thought I'd be doing this.
Wow.
And so for me, it was like, for them, it was great being able to share the music video, but just knowing like, y'all co-directed this. They're watching what you designed from your mindset. You came up with the idea and we executed that. And now here it is. So this is the fruit of what you work towards.
So
this is what it is.
I'm going to ask you this, like when you think about looking over your life and reflecting, what is something that Aitina today would tell the Aitina throwing chairs, you know, in kindergarten class or taking off earrings to go fight, right? What would you say to her?
I think I would do the same thing the counselor did because I often get asked that question. And I think in the beginnings of hearing that question, I would think of all the things that I would try to tell her so it could subside the emotion and subside the pain that little girl was feeling. But I think that in pain, there's beauty in that. And it's kind of tough for us to accept sometimes. Yeah. But I would just give her the tools because she's going to have to go through that to get to where I am. I can't take the pain from you, sis. I can't. But here's what I can give you to subside the pain. This pain is going to lead you to purpose. You just got to keep pushing. Wow. You just got to keep pushing. I can't alleviate the pain. I know someone that can, but I can't.
And even though you can't go back into a time machine and say that to your younger self, I do feel like you're saying that to these kids today.
You know what? I am. 2 ways. Yes to what you're saying, but that little girl is still there.
Okay.
So I'm still coping and healing and going through that process. But then, yes, I'm telling this generation, you're going to face pain. Yeah. And I cannot alleviate the pain. Right. But here are some tools.
So I got to ask you this, because yesterday I got to meet a very dynamic, creative, about 7 going on 17 in terms of how she thinks and talks. Tell us about, this full circle moment of going from having this disconnection and this traumatic severing of ties with your mom to now you being a mom, and this little girl who shows up in your videos, has her own mind. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that journey and where you're at now and who she is.
Aitina, my little 7-year-old daughter, is amazing. I feel like God placed her in my life to give her from me as her mom blood, to give her what I would have desired. Looking at her and the freedom that she has, man, it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. And I feel the way about both my children. My son is amazing as well. Shout out to him, his little creative self. Watching my daughter grow is just amazing. Seeing her express herself and then have someone, me and my husband, having structure to feel confident in who she is. And I don't know what she's going to become, but I'm what she needs. Just the same as my adoptive mother was what I needed, and my biological mother is what I needed, because I needed to be who I am today for her. And I don't know what she's going to become, or my son, but all I could be is me. And give them what I have, so that they can go ahead and be great and carry it on. Standing with our hands held high, freedom was a land whole time. We come from God. That's privilege. That's privilege, oh yeah. My origin is Eden. Soul grip freedom since the soil that he breathed in. Made man from his image. Serpent trying to tell me different. I know your lies. System set to hold us back. We know that. They point and tell us live in lack. Don't do that. Them boxes try to sell us back. Don't buy that. Still standing on the block like mannequins. Dance, monkey, dance. That sound like pandering. Still slaves? Y'all blame it on our blackness. I blame it on our habits. If that's the case, that's any pigment. Self-control. Get a grip. Management. Stack your cash and make it flip. Dividends. Make mistakes and own them all. Handle it. Still struggle. Still cope. Privilege, still standing, still hope, that's privilege. Family close, don't let go, that's privilege. Standing with our hands held high, freedom was a plan whole time. We come from God. That's privilege, that's privilege. Standing with our hands held high, freedom was a plan whole time. We come from God. That's privilege, that's privilege. America the beautiful, cotton in your cuticles, master in a cubicle, he who let her do the most, whips like taxes, fraction my cash in, goes on my napkin, tuck green in my satchel, stack up to the nightfall, notes in my chapter, this book of life, do me right, you just see my after, before I was captive, dirt all in my mattress, epitome of trash mess, imagine, a room with no pigment trying to tell me what black is, I'm privileged, even with my past full of distance, I'm privileged, even when you gain from my winning, I'm privileged. America, stand from these hands of privilege. Standing with our hands held high, freedom was a plan whole time. We come from God. That's privilege. That's privilege. Standing with our hands held high, freedom was a plan whole time. We come from God. That's privilege. That's privilege. Standing with our hands held high, freedom was a plan whole time. We come from God. That's privilege. Come from God. That's privilege. We come from God. We come from God. That's privilege. Yeah. That's privilege. Standing with our hands held high, freedom was a plan whole time. We come from God. Whole time, whole time, whole time, whole time. That's privilege.
This is Where You're From. I'm Rasul Berry, and remember, it's not just about where you're at, it's also about where you're from. This show was produced by Ryan Clevenger and Mary Jo Clark. I also want to thank listeners Lisa Bryant and Nicole Kinney for their help in supporting and promoting Where You're From. Thanks, y'all. Where You're From is part of the Voices collection from Our Daily Bread Ministries.
This episode is brought to you in part by Ministry Pivot with Russell St. Bernard. This podcast features important conversations with industry leaders such as Nona Jones, Bishop Walter Scott Thomas, Reverend Dr. Nicole Martin, and so many more. Visit ministrypivot.com or on all streaming platforms.